looking at possible, preferred, alternative futures and the myths and worldviews that are underneath them. So it's not just the future out there, but what are the stories about myself, about others that I tell. So foresight is, of course, there's a great Dutch term I heard the other day, fix the roof when the sun is still shining. So I thought that was really genius. That's how I see future studies. Don't wait till it's raining and you can't get to the roof. So the first idea I look at is the default future. That means if I continue doing things the way I am, what will be the result? Do I want that to be the result? So in health policy, I look at the data from WHO that 1 billion people will die in this century from smoking-related illnesses. So I said, given that's a default future, is that where we want to go? I said, well, for me, no. I don't want 1 billion people to die from smoking illnesses. I want something else. The second idea I look at is the use future. The use future is a habit, a process, a system that I'm doing that doesn't reflect my worldview or my values. So I'm doing them unconsciously. So many nations have national testing, even though what we learn about the knowledge economy is we need differentiation. We shouldn't have just IQ testing, we need multiple forms of intelligence, yet we test based on IQ. So the vision statement is multiple forms of intelligence, differentiation in the world economy. The testing is narrow. So that's the use future. Then I asked them, well, why are you doing that? So one ministry in Southeast Asia, I asked them that. They said, well, British told us to do it. Then I look at these buildings being built, the tallest building in the world. Why are they building the tallest? For city foresight, isn't it more important that citizens are happy, they have neighborhoods, it's safe, secure, have a beautiful design? And now a piece came out that looks at the tallest building and recessions, and they see an association. Money doesn't go into a livable city, it goes into speculative investment around the tallest building. So then I asked myself, why are so many Asian countries building tallest buildings? Is it density? Maybe. I think it's West is best. Let's compete and have the tallest. So that's the use future. The third core concept for me is the disowned future. And that I learned from two psychotherapists, Hal and Sidra Stone. And their notion is, as we grow from a vulnerable child to an adult, we put our energy, our thoughts, our practices into developing a very powerful egoistic self, which is fine. But in that process, we push away other selves, our 18-year-old self that loves freedom, our 5-year-old self that may be hurt, our self that needs to be with our family. And in that process, the disowning process, we lose access to these other identities. So we become very good at something, but we lose the full integration of what it means to be human. So a self gets disowned. So when I have people do visioning workshops, here's where we want to go, the actual thing that got disowned is what they may need to be successful. So you see the typical CEO, often male, at a certain age, suddenly they find out their wife leaves them, kids have left them, and so because they pushed away their family self. So often the disowned future is to reintegrate that. So not just to go in one direction, but understanding what am I losing in that process? How can I gain it back? And the fourth core concept is alternative future. Not one future, but many futures. So I look at kids or countries, and if they get focused on only one future is right, if there's a dramatic shift, like with the global financial crisis, and they can't adapt, they aren't flexible in their mind, then they have huge problems. At the national level, it could be alcoholism, could be suicide. At the personal level, people feel stuck. They say, wait a second, you told me this was going to happen. And in fact, it hasn't. And the fifth, and then after alternative futures, the fifth core concept is the inner story, the narrative. So I always see that every company, every person has a story. The story is neither wrong nor right, but the story informs how I construct meaning, what future I see, what past I see. So my question with them is the story effective in the world you wish to create? So someone could say, I want a beautiful world, but all day they're whinging and complaining. So I said, well, your story in terms of how you construct yourself is the world is a horrible place. And yet you want this beautiful place. What's the disconnect? And the last thing I ask them is, how do you use the future? That's the core concept. 6 uses of the future. Is it just for tools? Is it for capacity building? Or is it to change the meme, the ideas that get reinforced and create a different future? Or is it more spiritual, the idea of microvita? that reality has an emotional dimension to it, the emotions of molecules. So do you just want foresight for new tools? Fantastic. It will help your organization. Do you want capacity building, more powerful people who know where they want to go? Do you want core memes to change the future? Or the deepest change, you change the microvita, the emotional, the vibration dimension of reality? So with these 6 core concepts, that to me helps define where we wish to go and how we do that. Don't just get stuck on the litany. The litany is the data, the forecast, the headline, but ask myself, ask yourself, ask others, what's underneath that? So the meta dimension is what's underneath, what's above. It's a spatial metaphor. So not just being stuck on what we can see, but what can't we see? So I try to take groups, cities, organizations from the litany, the data we say over and over, to the story and link the two. And often what I find is some people are totally into the narrative, the metaphor, the story, and they have no link to reality. Some people are totally into reality and they don't have a link to the underlying causes of that reality. So Metafuture seeks to combine the official part of the future with the deeper part, as well as the inner part with the outer part. If you want to do real risk assessment, the real risk is having the wrong story. So it's taking risk analysis to a much deeper place. So I've worked with many organizations. They may have funding for a new project, lots of funding. But when I interview people in the organization, I said, well, what's your story around it? What's your metaphor? They may say things like, nothing is possible here. We hate working here. This place feels like Sisyphus. It's a burden. Or they say things like, it's horrible, it's being here feels like having a huge boulder on us, things like that. So then my conclusion is you want that future, but your own emotional state is this way, is a future, alternate future possible? So my conclusion is no. It's not just more finances, there has to be some story change. And so the metaphor dimension comes across there, asking people, what is their metaphor of the future? Lately I've been working a lot with the police, and so they might tell me, they've told me things like, well, we're Superman, meaning our training is in being strong, we have rules and regulations around physical strength, around weaponry, but there's kryptonite everywhere. So that tells me that even though they're strong, they feel lots of dangers everywhere. Is that an appropriate story? Another story that came out with policing was, police told me they feel like they're in a Roman Colosseum, they're the Christians, and there's a very strong line. The line is getting stronger and stronger due to new technologies, from genetic to information, etc. And I said, well, what else is going on in your metaphor? They said, well, in the Roman Colosseum, the minister just has his hand up or down. And I said, what are the citizens doing? The citizens are just watching. So the script is civilians, we normally see police as very strong, they feel very vulnerable here. The re-scripting is what's amazing. So I had police leaders say, well, the re-scripting is the citizens come down from the Roman Colosseum and help us. So then they don't feel so vulnerable. So the metaphorical transformation is the re-scripting of the future. And then once the new script has arrived, then we can ask questions like, in this scenario then, what funding do you need? What technology do you need? What rules do you need? How do we have the protocols with citizen and police? How do we create a really effective community policing? So I try to change the story, use the story transformation to create new systemic changes. And metaphor is the key there. Metaphor works at 2 levels. One, because a metaphor is often linked to some moment of trauma. Something very tough happened, and there's a myth around it, a story around it, an archetype around it. So that trauma has to be healed and transformed. And the metaphor often also gets to a different dimension of reality. So I know I was working in Fiji many years ago, and I asked the Fijians how they saw their future in this workshop, maybe not universal. They said, we felt like we're in a fast car, the driver is blindfolded, and we're in the passenger seat. So that quickly, for me, takes a 1,000-page critique of globalization in one sentence. Movement without direction, having no capacity or control. Now, I still want to link metaphor to science and data. It's, both have to be done. This is not an either or, it's both and. And I want to be careful here. One, we're all human beings. I just had the National Geographic Genome Test done. And it shows we mutated, we're all from this area in Africa 65,000 years ago. So at one level, the core human story is that we're human. That's foundational for me. Within that framework, yes, based on different historical practices, we construct reality different. So I know in Australia, it's very much the lucky country. So that becomes a guiding story. The challenge becomes for political leaders if Australians feel that the leaders aren't doing the right thing, then they say, are we running out of luck? Because lucky means you're giving people away. You have a sense of justice. So election a few years ago, people felt they were running out of luck. So they thought, oh my God, we need to keep being lucky. We have to do the right thing. So the lucky country is foundational there. Certainly in many trips to India, the onion story comes across very quick. The onion story comes out quite frequently, meaning reality is peeling away layers. And each layer you peel away comes to maybe an authentic self. So those are two types of differences. I know in the US, traditionally the metaphor was the ocean liner, that it can go anywhere, the whole world is theirs. Very much the worldview of manifest destiny. Now the challenge has been, that story has been very powerful, I would say even good for the world. That's reached its limit in terms of many nations around the world said, well, maybe you can't go everywhere. There's other people on the planet. So the decolonization movement was about challenging that story. Now the Gaian movement is also challenging that. Wait a second, maybe a ship, a starship, or a ship that goes everywhere, everything is your own, that's no longer appropriate in a Gaian world. So Obama comes in and says it's the day of reckoning. He says the old story is not working, and this is what's challenged for the American public right now. They're in a time of transition between stories. People want his new story, but now that they're seeing what that concretely means in terms of health, etc., then they get worried. So the story are culturally different, are naturally different, and the story can be used as a way to understand what might be coming down the road. Because different stories give you hints in terms of what the future may be like. What I've learned is, one, if you unpack an organization, you can see it at multiple levels, right? The data of the organization, their metrics, the system of the organization, how they organize money, technology, power, then the worldview, and then underneath is their metaphor. But I can also see how I can do that on myself. What is the dominant way I represent myself to others? My data. What is the system of my mind? And that goes into the worldview. Am I one self, multiple selves? And now in terms of worldviews, all of us unconsciously adopt different models of what it means to be mind. It could be the Indian view, which could be many layers of mind or the many chakras. Or it could be the classical Freudian view. There's an ego, a superego, and an id. So what I always ask is, how have you organized your mind? They say, what? I didn't even know I was organizing my mind. I thought it was just ego or me. And then you have Hal and Sidra Stone saying, no, it's not Freudian, nor is it many chakras or centers. It's actually multiplicity. So we all have multiple sub-personalities, and that's how we organize our mind. So my question is to get myself and others to look at, how is my model of self, is it efficacious? Ultimately, is it working to make me happier towards bliss, the world I wish, the future's dimension? If it's not, then I need to do the hard work of unpacking how I organize myself. I may decide there's one personality that I've pushed away for 20 years, I need to recover that. So the last question is, what are the stories I tell about myself during the day? There was a conference or a meeting I went to a few months ago, and during it I started to get bored. So this now becomes a moment of reflection. And what I decide to do, or something's wrong with me, let me choose a different self. Or I could have said, no, those people are boring, which is the easy way out. But I thought, okay, what within my map of identity creates an issue called boredom? How do I unpack that? So I find that quite liberating in futures, or just in any type of example, because if I can unpack myself, then I can create more efficacious futures. So scenario planning, as important, has to have an inner dimension too. The visual dimension is crucial for me. I have some images I showed. There's some commercials from the 1960s, and there's something called "more doctor smoke than cigarette than any other cigarette." So this is an image of what it means to be important, human, as a very wise doctor. Now, if you look at some of the images around medicine today, there's a doctor meditating or doing something else. So the image shifts. There's one great commercial I've seen from one oil company, and they boast the amount of energy we use can destroy 7 glaciers. So that was their marketing campaign in the 60s, and now if someone said that we use so much energy that 7 glaciers are destroyed, so the image of what it means to be human, what it means to have a good organization, that shifts over time. So I don't just ask what are the pushes, the drivers, or the weights, what's stopping a company, but what are the compelling images? And there's often not just one image. If you're looking at city foresight, there could be the dominant image of an industrial city. Now there's a new emerging image of the 24/7 high-tech virtual city. Then there's a third image of the green, Gaian, sustainable city. So these images are often in conflict, but often there's a dominant image and there's these new images creeping up. So if we want to change the future, I suggest let's also look at these different poles. Do we want to put more energy in that image? So it's noticing the drivers, but also being very clear, what are the images of the future that are guiding us? I think the image of the future is crucial in not just knowing where we want to go, but in fact where we are going. And the image of the future changes through history. I use the mapping metaphor because I'm visually challenged, because I can never find myself in any city. So that's my way to understand the world better. Pillar 1 is mapping. If we're in some place, we need to map the future, right? Some probabilities, some data points. Pillar 2 is anticipating. How might the map change? What if there's, in terms of genomics technology, virtual technology, changing spirituality, how would the map I have of the world start to shift because of emerging issues? So we disturb the map. Level 3, pillar 3 is timing of the future. If I have this information, when is the appropriate time to act? So is the future linear? Is it pendulum? Is it cyclical? Is it spiral? Based on these potential shapes of the future, I can enhance my strategy. If I know we're stuck in a pendulum, do I want to waste my time on this side when I know it's going to shift? The 4th pillar is deepening, going to the inner story, linking the story with systemic change. The 5th one is the scenarios, creating alternatives. And the last one, of course, is the crucial one, transforming the future. It can't just be the map. The map changes as we change. The universe is not closed in my sense. It's open even though there's deep structures. So the most important pillar is eventually having a vision of the future, and the method I use is backcasting. Once you're in that future, what happened? How did we get there? And backcasting is powerful because sometimes we imagine a world we want, then we go into despair. Oh my God, I can't create it. It will never happen. But if we can show how we got there, then strategy becomes simple. It could be just 3 things need to be done. I was working with one city and they had their wonderful vision of 2030. We finished the visioning part, the 6 pillars, and they were all depressed. I said, why? What's wrong? And they said, we don't think we can reach it. So then we did the backcast. Once we did the backcast, they realized, oh my God, only 3 things we have to change. So backcasting takes the impossible process and makes it possible. So 6 pillars: mapping, anticipating, timing, deepening, creating alternatives, and transforming. If you go really broad, then there's 4, 5, or 6 that I watch. One is transition from industrial energy, non-renewable to renewable energy. That's a major shift we have to make. And right now, the second transition is the regulatory frameworks for this energy shift are still nation state. It can't succeed in that. Again, what I learned in Holland is the rain doesn't stop at the border. So most of our problems are global in scope, so it has to be global solutions. So shift 2 is nation state to enhance global governance. Shift 3, we've had thousands of years of patriarchy. Women's power throughout the world is enhancing in fits and starts, but definitely women's way of knowing the world, and not just their way of knowing the world, but their active role in institutions, that's shifting the debate too. So the third major transition is going from patriarchy to hopefully gender partnership, but we're not sure which way we'll go. The fourth one, we've had 500 years of fantastic capitalism. It's made some inroads, but it has also led to inequity, challenges to the world environmental system. And so the next transition is to some other type of economic system. Hopefully we'll still have high production efficiency, but also we'll have more equity and softer on nature. The fifth is going from hierarchical modes of knowledge to peer-to-peer. We have vertical frameworks which are useful except when they become the only way of seeing the world. So when I work with police, they say, yes, verticality is important, but it should be contextual. In a crisis, we need vertical structures, right? Who does what, save the person. But we don't need to be hierarchical all the time. So functional hierarchy works, but the general structure becomes peer-to-peer. So those are, I think, 5 major shifts going on. And the last one is rewriting of the gene. We've had stable evolution. Now through genomics, we can start to see major shifts in understanding the genome and what it might mean. Or the last one, going from materialistic culture, which we've had again for many hundred years, and now moving to the potential of a spiritual culture. By spiritual, I don't mean any hierarchy, but everyone has access to one dimension of their personality that can give them bliss. So those are 6 possible transitions. What the world would look like in 2050, if those 6 happen, I think we'll have a far healthier place. I find if you're working at the national level, it's almost too big. There's so much complexity, so many problems, so much politics. At the local level, people love it, they get excited, they get inspired, but the capacity to change the large systems is less. The city is in between. And cities have started to get more organized in foresight because sometimes they're unhappy with the nation state. You know, you've seen cities everywhere when nation states have said we won't sign, Kyoto, etc. Cities have said, wait a second, we want to be part of this global carbon trading regimes. So city is a unit of size that allows efficacy of changing the world, and people live in cities and they can see what doesn't work, from pollution to congestion, and citizens want, I find, to play a role in creating a greener, a happier, a different type of future. So city size works in that sense. It's the appropriate unit. And cities have moved from what's in Australia called roads, rates, and rubbish, very narrow concern, to a broader concern. What is a healthy city like? And we're finding from transportation planning, if you have congestion, it just doesn't, one issue is you lose productivity, but the second issue is it's related to heart attacks. So actually personal health goes down. So we're seeing the link between transportation planning and personal health planning. We've seen some research studies, if you have too many fast food restaurants in a neighborhood, obesity goes up. So city design can influence actual productivity and how healthy we are. What I find, and again, a bit of generality, is one, the spiritual aspect is given. It's not challenged. Everyone accepts that's important. You don't get a debate about secularism, humanism, the Enlightenment. It's something that's given. It's not made a huge deal about, but it's part of reality. The second thing that comes out, especially in East Asia, is the economic miracle. 50 years ago, places in poverty. 50 years later, places doing financially quite well. So there's a bit of confidence. The third thing that comes about is the rise of China or Chindia. That in fact, major change in geopolitics. The fourth thing is being inspired very much by European Union. I know whatever problems European Union may have, I've noticed in discussions in East Asia especially, we need to learn from that. We need to solve some of these violent conflicts. We need to start talking about a shared currency. We need to find a global or a regional protocol to deal with some of our problems. So, and then when people say that's impossible, you say, well, Europe did it, is working on it, so why can't we? So if you put those 4 together, foresight, especially in East Asia, has lots of currency. Now, when I was working in Singapore, I asked the Singaporeans, why are you doing this? Why is it so important to do scenarios, envisioning, and backcasting? They said, because we don't have the same resource base as other countries. We're not so lucky. But we have our brains. So our brains have to be more flexible. We need multiple forms of intelligence. Now, when I work in South Asia, the weights and the heaviness are very strong. There's been so many wars. So especially from older people, if you try to do foresight, they'll say, yes, interesting, won't work, can't happen, will always be like this. But younger people under 35, they're far more inspired. They actually are going through the shift from vertical structures to peer-to-peer, and digital technologies have had a huge role in that. They feel more inspired. They've seen globalization. They've seen some of the horrors of terrorism. They don't want that future. So they're getting clear based on the contrast, what world do we want? They've been through so much suffering. No, we don't want that. There's better ways to do it. So in Asia, the role of foresight becomes far more important. The cultural balance I'm trying to get is between agency, capacity to create the future, and structure, the challenge of doing so. If there's too much agency, then many parts of Asian culture, the role of modesty. You don't want to stand out, right? In the US, the goal is to stand out. Generally, Asians, there is a more collectivism. So miracle, then you don't have to say how hard we worked, there was some other force. So it's a way to be humble. The other side, we know the countries that did do well, strong investment in education, hard work, vision of the future, etc. Those were crucial aspects. And breaking down feudalism, releasing that productive capacity. So yes, I think miracle plays out in both ways. One, it allows modesty to continue, and two, it is sensitive to I think a cultural ethos, again, without overgeneralizing, that there is some other role. It's not just hard work, it's imagination, it could be even the role of spirituality. There's some other cultural factors.